"Point her out to me," the Duke of Ashworth said. "Lo, so I know which woman I am meant to overlook tonight." His aunt smiled behind her fan. Lady Carmody had brought him to the Verwood ball for one reason only, to marry him off before the season ended, and she mistook his question for interest in the eligible daughters glittering along the far wall. "Any of them, Julian. The Harrow girls are handsome. The Fenchurch heiress has £40,000. Take your pick. They are all praying you will look their way." But Julian Ashworth was not looking at the heiresses. He had already found the one woman in the room. No one else could be troubled to see. She stood in the shadow of a marble pillar near the servants' door, a little apart from the dancing, in a gown 3 seasons out of fashion, gray muslin, mended once at the shoulder, the lace at her wrists gone soft and yellow with washing. She held a tray of untouched lemonade because someone had handed it to her, and she had not known how to refuse. She was, the room had already decided, nobody, and she was the only thing in it he could not stop watching. "That one," he said, "by the pillar. The one holding the tray who is not a servant." Lady Carmody's fan stopped. "Oh no, no, no. That is Miss Eleanor Vale. You do not want her, my dear. There is nothing there. There is a great deal there," he said. "Everyone is simply looking the other way." He should not have come. He knew that. The Duke of Ashworth did not go to balls. He had not gone to one in 4 years. Not since his father's death had dropped the whole vast weight of the dukedom onto his shoulders, and taught him that a man in his position had no friends, only claimants. He had learned to be cold, because coldness was the only wall high enough to keep the fortune hunters out. They called him the Iron Duke, and meant it as a warning to their daughters. He had let them. It kept the ballrooms quiet around him, and quiet was the closest thing to peace he had found. But his aunt had wept, actually wept, the old tyrant, over the unmarried state of the House of Ashworth, and he owed her too much to refuse her one evening. So he had come, and within an hour of arriving he had stopped hearing the music, because a woman in a mended gray gown had crossed the room to help a dowager who had dropped her cane, and no one else had moved, and she had done it so quietly and so completely that it was over before anyone noticed it had happened. She had helped the old woman to a chair. She had retrieved the cane. She had said something that made the dowager laugh, the first real laugh Julian had heard all night, and then she had stepped back into the shadow of her pillar as though returning to a place she had been assigned. He had not been able to look away since. "Tell me about her," he said. Lady Carmody sighed the sigh of a woman who sees an evening's careful planning coming apart. Eleanor Vale. Her father was Sir Henry Vale. A good family, an old name, no money left in it. He died 2 winters past, and left her to the care of his brother, Mr. Silas Vale, who married a widow with 2 daughters of her own. "You may see the daughters there." She nodded toward 2 young women in identical rose-colored silk, laughing too loudly near the orchestra. "Prudence and Augusta Fenn. Their mother is Silas Vale's wife. They have the money now, what little there is, and the connections, and they mean to marry it upward. Eleanor," her aunt's voice softened, despite herself. "Eleanor keeps their accounts, and mends their gowns, and is brought to balls to carry things, and she is 24, and she has no dowry, and no prospects, and a plain, tired face, and every matchmaker in London has crossed her off. That is the whole of it. She is a kind girl and a lost cause. And you, Julian, are a duke. Look at the Fenchurch heiress. She is looking at you." "Her face is not plain," Julian said. His aunt gave him a sharp, searching look. "It is not fashionable," she allowed, which in this room is the same thing. Across the ballroom, at that very moment, Miss Augusta Fenn plucked the tray of lemonade from Eleanor's hands, took a glass, and said something to her stepsister that made Prudence laugh. A bright, cruel sound that carried farther than either girl intended. Eleanor's chin lifted a fraction. That was all. She did not flinch, and she did not answer. She simply stood a little straighter under it, the way a person stands who has been laughed at so many times that she has made a private decision never to let it bend her spine. And Julian, watching, felt something turn over in his chest that had been still for 4 years. He had spent those years believing that everyone who approached him wanted something. Here was a woman the whole glittering room had agreed was worth nothing, and she wanted nothing from him at all. She did not even know he was watching. There was no calculation in her, no angle, no bright false laugh aimed in his direction. There was only a tired, dignified young woman holding her ground in a corner, and he found that he would rather have crossed the room to her than to any heiress in England. So he did. He was aware, as he moved, of the ballroom, noticing. A duke crossing a floor is not a small thing. Heads turned in a slow wave. The orchestra seemed to play more softly. Lady Carmody made a sound behind him that was half protest and half prayer. He ignored all of it. He walked past the Fenchurch heiress, who had arranged herself directly in his path, and now watched her £40,000 walk by. He walked past Prudence and Augusta Fenn, who fell silent and then began, too late, to smile and curtsy, certain the great Duke of Ashworth was coming to be introduced to them. He walked past them all. He stopped in front of the woman by the pillar. Up close, she was not what the room believed. Her eyes were gray and steady, and far more awake than any pair of eyes he had met that season. They took his measure without fear and without hope, as though she had learned long ago to expect nothing from men who wore his kind of coat. There was a smudge of ink on the side of her middle finger. She had been keeping someone's accounts that very afternoon, he would have wagered, and a strand of dark hair had come loose at her temple, and she was, he thought, quite unlike anyone he had ever wanted to know. "Forgive me," Anne said. "We have not been introduced. I find I do not care. My name is Julian." A duke does not give his Christian name. He gives his title, and the room bows. He watched her understand that he had done something unusual, and watched her decline to be impressed by it. "That is a very grand way to introduce yourself as an ordinary man, sir," she said. Her voice was low and even. "Julian what?" "Ashworth." He saw the name land. He saw her go still, not the fluttering stillness of a girl who has caught a duke's eye, but the wary stillness of a person who has just realized the ground beneath her has become dangerous. Her eyes flicked, once, toward her stepsisters, and he understood. Whatever this cost her, they would make her pay it later. She had learned to count that cost before she spent anything. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied, and the warmth that had been in her voice a moment before shut like a door. "You have mistaken me for someone worth the walk across the room. I am Eleanor Vale. I keep my uncle's household. If you require directions to the supper room, or to the young ladies my stepmother would be very glad to present to you, I am happy to provide them." "I do not require directions," he said. "I require this dance." The words fell into a small pocket of silence that had opened around them, and he watched them travel outward. He watched Prudence Fenn's mouth fall open. He watched a matron near the orchestra put a hand to her chest. He watched Eleanor Vale, alone of everyone in the room, fail to be delighted. "You should not do that," she said, very quietly, so that only he could hear. "Whatever you mean by it. You do not know what it costs a woman like me to be singled out by a man like you, and then set down again. They will not forget it. I will still be here mending their hems when you have gone back to your castle and forgotten my name by Tuesday. Please, ask one of the pretty ones. It will cost none of you anything." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years, and he felt it go into him like a blade. "Miss Vale," he said, "I have not forgotten a name I wished to keep since I was a boy, and I did not walk the length of the Verewood Ballroom, past every heiress in London, past my aunt's entire evening of scheming, to dance with a pretty one." He held out his hand. It hung there in the candlelight, ringed, waiting, in full view of a room that had gone entirely silent. "I walked it to dance with you, now, before all of them, so that not one person here can pretend afterward that they did not see it." She looked at his hand for a long moment. He would think about that moment for the rest of his life. The length of it, the weight of the whole room pressing down on it. The visible mathematics of a woman deciding whether a single dance was worth the price her stepsisters would extract. He half expected her to refuse. Part of him, the part that had learned to expect the worst of everyone, was braced for it. Then she set down the tray on the ledge of the pillar, with great care, as though it were something she had been asked to guard, and she put her ink-stained hand in his. "You will regret this by Tuesday," she said. "I will not," he said. regret it ever. And he led Eleanor Vale onto the floor, while the finest families in England forgot to breathe. The orchestra, to their credit, recovered before the dancers did. They struck up a waltz, the daring dance, the close one, the one the patronesses still murmured about. And Julian was almost certain it was deliberate, that some musician with a sense of theater had decided that if the Iron Duke was going to shock the room, he might as well shock it thoroughly. He did not mind. He drew Eleanor Vale into the frame of the waltz, one hand at the small of her back, and felt her tremble once and then steady, the way she had steadied under her stepsister's laugh. "You are angry with me," he observed. "I am frightened of you," she corrected. "There is a difference, and you have probably never had cause to learn it. Angry people want to strike you. Frightened people only want to survive you." She lifted her chin. "I intend to survive you, Your Grace. Do not imagine that because I took your hand I have any illusions about what this is. Tell me what it is, then, since you seem certain." "It is a whim." She danced well, better than he had expected, though he chided himself for the expectation. Of course she danced well. She had likely spent 100 evenings against the wall of a ballroom watching others do it, learning every step she was never invited to take. "You are bored, and you are rich enough to be bored beautifully. And you saw the least fortunate woman in the room, and thought it would be amusing to lift her up for the length of a song. Tomorrow you will be gone. The song will end, and I will collect the tray, and Augusta will find 14 ways to make me sorry. And by the time you have finished your breakfast, you will have forgotten there was ever a woman in gray. I do not blame you for it. It is simply the shape of the world. But do not ask me to be grateful." Every word of it was armor, and he could see the shape of the wounds it was built to cover. He had built armor of his own. He recognized the craftsmanship. "You have decided a great deal about me," he said, "for a woman who has known me the length of half a waltz." "I have known men like you my whole life, sir." "No," he said, "you have not, because there are no men like me. There is only me, and you have known me since the orchestra began, and you have already decided how it ends. That is not wisdom, Miss Vale. That is fear, wearing wisdom's coat. I should know. I have worn the same coat for 4 years." She missed a step. He caught her, easily, and she recovered. And for the first time she looked at him, really looked, the gray eyes searching his face, as though she had heard something in his voice she had not expected to find there. "Why did you cross the room?" she asked. Not a challenge now, a real question. He considered lying. It would have been easier, but she had been honest with him, brutally, beautifully honest, and he found he could not answer her with anything less. "Because you helped the old woman with the cane," he said, and no one else moved. "Because your stepsister took the glass from your hand and laughed at you, and you did not let it bend you. Because in a room full of people performing for me, you were the only one who did not know I was watching, and so you were the only one being true. I have 4,000 acres and a seat in the Lords, and more money than the whole of this ballroom put together, Miss Vale, and I would trade a great deal of it for a single evening in which one person wanted nothing from me. You wanted nothing from me. You still want nothing from me. Do you know how rare that is? In my life? You are the rarest thing in this room, and they have all agreed to call you the least. I crossed the floor because I could not bear to watch them do it for one more minute." The music turned. He drew her through the turn, and she came, light in his arms, and when they faced each other again, there was something in her face that had not been there before. A crack in the armor, small and terrible and true. "You should not say such things to me," she whispered. "I will believe them. And then when you go, I will have to survive not just Augusta, but the memory of a night when a man looked at me as though I were the rarest thing in the room. Do you understand? Your kindness is more dangerous to me than their cruelty. I know how to survive their cruelty. I have no defense at all against being seen." "Then do not defend against it," he said. The waltz ended. For one heartbeat they stood together in the center of the floor, the last chord dying, every eye in the Verwood ballroom fixed on the Duke of Ashworth and the nobody in gray. And then the whispers began, a rising tide of them, from behind fans and over shoulders. "Who is she? One of the Vale girls. No, the poor one, the plain one. What can he mean by it? It is a cruel joke, surely, or a wager. They say he is cold as iron. What can he want with her? And Julian saw Eleanor hear every word of it, saw the color rise in her face, saw her begin, already, to retreat back toward her pillar and her tray, and the small assigned corner of the world she had been permitted. He did not let go of her hand. "Your Grace," she said, low and urgent. "Please. The dance is done. Let me go before you make it worse." "No," he said. He said it to her, but he pitched it for the room, and the room, which had been whispering, went quiet, to hear what the Iron Duke would say. It was Lady Silas Vale who broke the silence, Eleanor's stepmother, sweeping forward in plum-colored satin with her 2 daughters in her wake, her face arranged into the warm, false brightness of a woman who has spotted an opportunity and means to seize it before it escapes. She had watched a duke dance with her stepdaughter, and she had, Julian could see, already rewritten the entire evening in her head. The plain girl had been a mistake, a means. If a duke wanted a veil, well, there were prettier veils to be had. "Your Grace," she cooed, sinking into a curtsy so deep it was nearly a genuflection. "What an honor. What a very great honor. You are too kind entirely, to have taken pity on our poor Eleanor. She so rarely dances. It was Christian of you. Now, may I present my daughters? This is Prudence, and this is Augusta. Augusta plays the pianoforte quite beautifully. And Prudence." "Madam," Julian said, "I did not take pity on anyone." Lady Vale's smile flickered. "Your Grace? You said I took pity on your Eleanor. I did not. Pity is what you feel for something beneath you. I danced with Miss Vale because she is the most worthwhile person I have met this season, and I wished the honor of her company. There was no charity in it. If anything, madam, the charity ran the other way. She was gracious enough to accept a stranger who interrupted her evening, which is more courtesy than I have been shown by anyone else in this room." The silence that followed was exquisite. Julian had spent 4 years learning exactly how to wield a silence, and he let this one work. Augusta Fenn recovered first. She had her mother's instinct for opportunity, if not her mother's caution. "Your Grace is very gallant," she said, with a little laugh, stepping forward so that the candlelight caught her rose silk and her bright, practiced smile. "But surely you are teasing us. Eleanor is a dear, of course. We are all fond of her. But she is not, that is, she keeps the household accounts. She is not really out in society, not the way Prudence and I are. If it is company you enjoy, Your Grace, I should be so glad to." "Miss Fenn," Julian said, "may I ask you something?" Augusta glowed. "Of course, Your Grace. When the Dowager dropped her cane an hour ago, and it rolled across the floor, and she stood helpless in the middle of a room of 200 people, where were you?" Augusta's smile faltered. I beg your pardon?" "It is a simple question. The old woman near the orchestra. She dropped her cane. She could not bend to retrieve it. 200 people watched her stand there, and not one of them moved. Not you, not your sister, not your mother, not a single heiress or lord or lady in this glittering room, except one. Miss Vale crossed the floor and helped her to a chair and returned her cane and made her laugh and asked nothing and told no one. I watched the whole of it. So did you, Miss Fenn. You were standing not 10 feet away. You watched an old woman struggle, and you did nothing, because there was no advantage in it, and no one important was looking." He let his gaze move over the 3 of them, unhurried. "That is the difference between your stepsister and the rest of you. She is kind when no one is watching. You are kind only when a duke is. I have spent 4 years being flattered by people exactly like you, and I have never once mistaken it for worth." Lady Vale had gone white. "Your Grace, I must protest. My daughters are gently bred. This is most. You brought her here to carry your trays," Julian said, "and now there was iron in it, the cold that had earned him his name. You dressed your own daughters in silk and put your brother's child in a mended gown 3 seasons old, and let a room full of strangers understand exactly how little you valued her. You did it to make your girls shine brighter by the contrast. I want you to know, madam, that it did not work. She outshone them the moment she crossed the floor to help a stranger. And every person of any sense in this room saw it, and no amount of rose silk will undo it now. Somewhere behind him, a woman laughed. Not cruelly, delightedly. The dowager with the cane, who had heard every word and was not troubling to hide her enjoyment of it. Eleanor's hand had gone rigid in his. "Your Grace," she breathed. "Stop, please. You are making it so much worse." "Am I?" He turned to her, and his voice gentled entirely, the iron gone as though it had never been. "Then tell me to stop, and I will. Tell me you wish me to release your hand and walk away, and leave you to your tray and your pillar, and your stepmother's mercy, and I will do it, and I will not trouble you again. It is your choice, Eleanor. It has always been your choice. I have taken enough choices from you tonight by making a spectacle you did not ask for, so I will not take this one. Do you want me to go?" And there it was, the whole of it, laid out in front of 200 witnesses. The plain girl in gray, the Iron Duke with his hand around hers, the stepmother white with fury, the stepsisters gaping. The whole cruel machinery of the marriage market stopped dead and waiting to see what the nobody would say. Eleanor Vale looked at the room. She looked at her stepsisters. She looked, last and longest, at him. "No," she said, barely above a whisper, but it carried. The room had gone so silent that a whisper crossed it like a bell. "No, I do not want you to go." Julian Ashworth smiled, the first true smile the Verwood Ballroom had ever seen on the face of the Iron Duke, and lifted her ink-stained hand to his lips. "Then I am not going anywhere," he said. He called at the house on Wimpole Street the next morning at 11 o'clock, and again the morning after that, and by the end of the week the whole street knew that the Duke of Ashworth's carriage, the black one with the silver crest, the one the newspapers had begun to mention, stood outside the modest door of Mr. Silas Vale for an hour each day. Lady Vale did not know what to do with it. She had spent 2 winters treating Eleanor as an unpaid servant, and now the servant was being courted by the richest unmarried man in England, and every instinct the woman possessed pulled in a different direction. She could not throw Eleanor out. A duke was calling. She could not elevate her. That would mean admitting the girl was worth elevating, and it would put her ahead of Prudence and Augusta, which was intolerable. So she did the only thing a small and frightened cruelty knows how to do. She tried to control it. Eleanor was not permitted to receive the Duke alone. Lady Vale sat in the drawing room the whole of every visit, on the good sofa, in her best cap, inserting herself into every sentence. Augusta was made to sit at the pianoforte and play, loudly, at the least convenient moments. Prudence was dispatched to fetch things and to laugh at nothing. The message was plain. If a duke was to be caught, he would be caught for the family, not for the plain girl who had somehow, undeservingly, drawn his eye. Julian saw all of it. He had spent 4 years reading the small strategies of people who wanted things from him, and Lady Vale's were not subtle. He let her sit in the room. He answered Augusta's fishing questions with a courtesy so precise it was nearly a wall. And he watched Eleanor, who said little, who had learned that speaking drew punishment, who sat with her hands folded over the ink stain she could never quite scrub away, and waited for the visit to be over, so that she could go back to being invisible, which was at least safe. On the 5th day he did something about it. "Mr. Vale," he said, for Silas Vale had been summoned home from his club to be present, a duke being a duke. "I wonder if I might take Miss Eleanor driving. The morning is fine. My aunt, Lady Carmody, will accompany us. You need have no concern for propriety." He said it as a request, but it was not one, and every adult in the room understood that a duke's request is a thing one does not refuse. Lady Vale opened her mouth. Silas Vale, who was a weak man, but not entirely a stupid one, and who had begun to calculate what a ducal connection might do for his own standing, closed it for her. "Of course, Your Grace. Of course. Eleanor, fetch your bonnet. The good one." She did not own a good one. She fetched the one she had, gray to match the gown, and Julian handed her up into the open carriage, as though she were made of glass. And Lady Carmody, who had come round entirely, and now regarded the whole affair as the most delicious thing to have happened to her in a decade, settled herself opposite with her fan, and her frank, twinkling eyes, and they drove out into the park. For the first quarter hour, Eleanor said nothing at all. She sat very straight, her gloved hands in her lap, watching the fashionable world roll past, and watching the fashionable world watch her. And Julian let her have the silence, because he had learned that she used silence the way he used it, as a place to stand, while she decided whether the ground was safe. "They are all staring," she said at last. "They are," he agreed. "They are trying to understand what you want with me. So am I, Your Grace. I have been trying to understand it for 5 days. I have decided you are either the kindest man I have ever met, or you are playing a game whose rules I cannot see, and I confess, I cannot tell which. And the not knowing is—" She stopped. "Forgive me. I have no right to speak to you so." "You have every right," he said. "You are the only person who does. Ask me anything you like, Eleanor. I will tell you the truth. I have discovered I cannot seem to lie to you. It is a most inconvenient discovery for a man in my position." She turned and looked at him, and Lady Carmody very tactfully became fascinated by the trees. "What do you want with me?" Eleanor said. "The truth, not gallantry. I have had gallantry all week, and it has told me nothing. What do you want?" Julian looked at her, the tired gray eyes, the stubborn chin, the ink she could not wash away, the whole brave, worn, unwanted truth of her, and he told her. "I want to marry you," he said. The carriage seemed to go very quiet, though it rolled on. Eleanor did not move. "That is not amusing," she said finally. "No," he agreed. "It is the least amusing thing I have ever said. I have thought of little else for 5 days, and I find I am entirely in earnest, which alarms me a great deal, as I have not been in earnest about anything since my father died. I want to marry you, Eleanor Vale, not to rescue you. You would hate that, and rightly, and I have watched you rescue yourself every single day of the week, so I harbor no illusion that you need me to do it. Not out of pity. We have settled the question of pity. I want to marry you because you are the only person in England who looks at me and sees a man rather than a fortune, and because you are braver than any soldier I commanded in Spain, and because when you helped that old woman with the cane, something in me that had been asleep for 4 years woke up and has refused to go back to sleep since. I want to marry you because I would rather be poor with you than rich with anyone else. And I am not even slightly poor, which means I can offer you the one thing you have never in your life been given, which is a place where no one will ever again be permitted to make you feel small. That is what I want. Now you know. You may laugh at me if you like. Lady Carmody is pretending not to listen and will not repeat a word of it." "Not a word," Lady Carmody agreed, to the trees, her voice not entirely steady. Eleanor Vale did not laugh. She looked down at her folded hands, at the gray gloves and the gray gown, and the whole gray life that had been handed to her, and Julian watched 2 tears fall and darken the fabric, and he did not reach for her, because he understood that she needed to arrive at this herself, without being carried. "I do not know how to be a duchess," she whispered. "You already know," he said. "A duchess is only a woman who helps the old woman with the cane when no one else will move. You have been practicing your whole life. You simply did it without the coronet. They will say, you married beneath you." "They will say it once," he said, "and then they will look at you, and they will stop saying it, because you will be so plainly the finest woman in any room you enter, that the words will die in their mouths. And if they do not, Eleanor, look at me. If they do not stop saying it, I do not care. I have spent 4 years caring what the world thinks of the House of Ashworth. I am finished. Let them talk. I will have you, and a warm house, and a wife who married me for no reason at all except that she came, at last, to want me. And I will pity every duke in England who has to go home to a woman who married his money." She lifted her head. The tears were still on her face, but her eyes had changed, the wariness burning off them like morning fog, something underneath it that he had not seen before, something that had been buried so deep and so long that it had nearly forgotten how to come up into the light. Hope, plain, terrified, beginning hope. "Ask me properly," she said, "if you mean it. Ask me the way you would ask a woman you thought was worth asking. I have spent 2 years being told I am worth nothing. If you are going to undo that, Julian Ashworth, you will have to do it properly. so that I can believe it for the rest of my life." So the Duke of Ashworth stopped the carriage in the middle of Hyde Park, in front of half of fashionable London, and he stepped down, and he handed his hat to his astonished aunt, and he went down on one knee in the dust of the path beside the open carriage, in full view of everyone who had spent a week whispering that it must be a joke or a wager or a cruelty, and he took Eleanor Vale's ink-stained hand in both of his. "Eleanor," he said, loud enough that the nearest carriages could hear, and he found he wanted them to hear, wanted every one of them to carry the story home. "You are the bravest and the kindest and the least ordinary woman I have ever known, and I have loved you since you crossed a ballroom for a stranger. I have 4,000 acres, and I would give them all to be worthy of you. Will you do me the honor, the very great honor, greater than anything my rank has ever brought me, of becoming my wife?" And Eleanor Vale, plain and penniless and 24, who had been told she was too plain to marry, who had been brought to a ball to carry the lemonade, looked down at the Duke of England's greatest house, kneeling in the dust for her, and she began, at last, to smile, a smile no one had bothered to earn from her in 2 long years, wide and wet and disbelieving and radiant. "Yes," she said. "Oh yes, you impossible man, yes." The betrothal of the Duke of Ashworth to Miss Eleanor Vale was announced in the papers on a Thursday, and by Friday the house on Wimpole Street had been transformed into a theater of Lady Vale's ambition. The change was total and shameless. Overnight, Eleanor was moved from the cold little room under the eaves to the best bedchamber. Overnight, a dressmaker was summoned, and Eleanor was ordered, in the same voice that had 2 weeks ago told her to darn Augusta's stockings, to stand for fittings. Lady Vale spoke now of "my dear Eleanor and our darling girl," and told every caller how she had always known, always, that Eleanor's sweet nature would be rewarded. She had begun, Julian understood, to write herself into the story, as the loving guardian who had raised the future Duchess. It was breathtaking in its way. He had seen generals with less nerve. Eleanor bore it with a stillness that worried him. She did not gloat. She had no cruelty in her, but neither did she thaw toward the woman who had used her for 2 years and now draped her in silk to share in her triumph. She simply endured the fittings and the false endearments with the same patient dignity she had once endured the mending, as though she understood that this new kindness was no more about her than the old cruelty had been. But the stepsisters could not bear it, and where Lady Vale had the cunning to remake herself, Prudence and Augusta Fenn had only their spite, and 3 weeks before the wedding, Augusta used it. Julian learned of it the way one learns of a knife, after it was already in. He arrived at Wimpole Street on a gray afternoon to find the drawing-room full of the wrong kind of silence. Eleanor sat very white and very straight on the sofa. Lady Vale stood by the window wringing her hands, and on the low table between them lay an open letter, and beside it, spread like a dealt hand of cards, a small stack of others. "Your Grace," Lady Vale began, "I am sure it is all a misunderstanding. I am sure Eleanor can explain." "Explain what?" Julian said. He did not sit. It was Augusta who answered, Augusta by the fireplace, flushed and bright-eyed and unable, even now, to keep the triumph out of her face. "We found letters, Your Grace," she said, "in Eleanor's old room. Love letters, to a man, a soldier, a lieutenant. No fortune, no name to speak of. They are 2 years old, from before Papa died. But they are, well, they are warm, Your Grace, warmer than a lady's letters ought to be. She was writing to a penniless soldier and meeting him without a chaperone. And now she is to be a duchess, and we thought, that is, Mama thought, that you ought to know the sort of woman you are marrying, before it is too late to be spared." She had rehearsed it. Julian could hear the rehearsal in it, and he understood, in the space of a breath, exactly what this was. The last weapon of a losing girl. If Augusta could not be a duchess, she could at least ensure that Eleanor was not, could break the match, ruin the name, and drag her stepsister back down into the gray where she belonged. It did not matter to Augusta whether the letters meant anything. It only mattered that they could be made to look like something. Scandal did not require truth. It required only a plausible shape, and a room willing to believe the worst of a woman. Julian looked at Eleanor. She had not moved. She was watching him, not pleading, not protesting, just watching, with the old wariness back in full, and something worse beneath it, a kind of exhausted resignation, as though she had always known that the gray would reach up and take her back in the end, as though a thing this good could never truly be allowed to belong to her. "Is it true," he asked her, gently, "that there was a soldier?" "Yes," Eleanor said. Her voice did not shake. "His name was Thomas Hale. He was my father's steward's son. We grew up together. When we were 19, we believed we were in love, and we wrote letters. And once, twice, we walked out together without a chaperone, which was foolish, and which I would not do again. And then he went to Spain, with his regiment, and he died at Badajoz, 3 years ago, before my father ever fell ill." She lifted her chin. "So yes, Augusta, there was a soldier. He is buried in Spain. I have not written a letter to any man since, because there was no man left to write to, and then my father died, and I learned that letters are a luxury for women with time and hope, and I had run out of both. That is the terrible scandal you have unearthed. I loved a good boy who died for his country when I was 19. If that ruins me, then I am ruined, and you may have the drawing room back." The room was silent. Julian crossed to the table. He picked up the letters. Augusta actually stepped forward, as though to stop him, and then thought better of it, and he read them, all of them, unhurried, while the family watched. They were exactly what Eleanor had said. The letters of a girl of 19 to a boy of 20, sweet and shy, and entirely innocent, full of small hopes and smaller jokes, and a tenderness so young it made his chest ache. The worst of them, the one Augusta had left open, the one meant to damn her, contained the shocking confession that Eleanor had kept a pressed flower he had given her at the harvest fair. That was the scandal, a pressed flower. He set the letters down. "Miss Fenn," he said, "do you know what these are?" Augusta's chin came up. "Evidence, Your Grace, that your intended is not the innocent she." "They are grief," Julian said. "They are the whole record of a first love that ended in a grave at Badajoz, kept by a girl who has nothing else left of the boy who died. That is what you found in your stepsister's room. Not a scandal, a shrine. She loved someone once, purely and young, and he died for England, and she kept his letters and a pressed flower. And you." His voice did not rise, and it was somehow worse for that. "You went into the room of a grieving woman, and you took the last things she had of a dead boy, and you spread them on a table, and called them dirty, and you did it to break her, because you could not bear that she should be happy. Because a girl you spent 2 years grinding under your heel is about to rise higher than you will ever climb, and it is unendurable to you, and so you tried to poison the one good thing that has ever happened to her, with the memory of a boy in a soldier's grave." Augusta had gone very red. "I only thought you ought to." "You thought I would recoil," Julian said. "You thought I was the sort of man who could be turned against a woman by the discovery that she has a heart. You have misjudged me as thoroughly as your whole family has misjudged her." He turned from her as though she had ceased to exist, and he knelt, for the second time in the story of them, in front of Eleanor Vale, and he took the letters and folded them, gently, and pressed them back into her hands, and closed her fingers over them. "These are yours," he said, low, for her alone, though the room could hear. "They were always yours. I am not diminished by them. I am humbled by them. You loved a good man once, and lost him, and carried the grief in silence for 3 years, while these people worked you like a servant, and you never once grew hard, Eleanor. You could have. God knows you had the cause. You grew kind instead. Do you know what that tells me about the woman I am to marry? It tells me that when life is cruelest to you, you answer with more gentleness, not less. There is no fortune in England I would take over that. Keep your letters. Keep your flower. Keep Thomas Hale in whatever corner of your heart he has earned. There is room in a good marriage for an honored grief. I am not marrying a woman who has never loved. I am marrying a woman who knows exactly what love is worth, which is the only kind of woman worth marrying at all." Eleanor was weeping now, openly, the letters pressed to her chest, and she was not the only one. Lady Vale had turned entirely to the window, and her shoulders were not steady. "You still want me," Eleanor said. "Even now. Even after." "More than before," Julian said. "If that is possible. Marry me, Eleanor. Let me take you out of this house today, and never bring you back to it. Let me give you a life where the only letters anyone reads are the ones addressed to you." He rose and drew her up with him, and turned at last to the two stepsisters and their white-faced mother. "You will not be at the wedding," he said. "None of you. I had thought, for Eleanor's sake, to keep the peace, and invite you, and let the world believe this a happy family. I am finished with that. You had 2 years to be kind to her, and you spent them being cruel. And when kindness would finally have cost you nothing, when all you had to do was let her be happy, you reached instead for the last thing that could hurt her. So no. You will read about the wedding in the papers, as strangers do. Come, Eleanor, you will not spend another night under this roof." And he took the future Duchess of Ashworth out of the house on Wimpole Street, through the front door, past the good sofa and the summoned dressmaker, and the whole crumbled theater of Lady Vale's ambition, and he handed her up into the black carriage with the silver crest, and they drove away, and Eleanor Vale did not look back. The 6 weeks before the wedding, Eleanor spent under the roof of Lady Carmody, who took to the arrangement with the delight of a woman given a project after a long, dull retirement. She fed Eleanor properly. "You are all elbows and shadows, child. We shall want a fortnight of good dinners before you can be a duchess." And she talked, endlessly, warmly, about the world Eleanor was entering, not to frighten her, but to arm her. And she watched, with a shrewd old eye, the way her nephew came to the house every single day, and the way the tired gray girl she had first pointed out at the ball grew, week by week, into someone lit from within. But the graying of 2 hard years does not lift all at once, and there was an evening, a fortnight before the wedding, when Julian found his bride sitting alone in Lady Carmody's small garden in the blue dusk, her hands folded, her face troubled. He sat beside her on the stone bench and did not speak. He had learned to let her come to it. "I keep waiting," she said at last, "for you to see it, the thing they all saw. I keep waiting to wake and find you have looked at me one morning, the way one looks at a bargain regretted. I know it is unworthy of me. You have given me no cause. But I was told for 2 years that I was worth nothing, Julian. Told it so often and so plainly that some part of me believed it and believes it still. And that part of me cannot understand why the Duke of Ashworth crosses London every day to sit in a garden with me, and it keeps whispering that you will stop." She pressed her hands together. "There, now you know the worst of me. I am afraid of my own happiness. I do not know how to trust it." Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he took her folded hands and unfolded them, gently, and laid them flat against his own, palm to palm, so that she could feel the warmth of him. "When my father died," he said, "I was 22, and I inherited more than most men see in a lifetime, and within a month, I understood that not one person who smiled at me. They smiled at the dukedom. For 4 years I have been the richest, lonely man in England, Eleanor, surrounded by people, wanted by everyone, seen by no one. So I know your fear. I have its brother. You were told you were worth nothing until you nearly believed it. I was told I was worth everything, until I could not tell any longer whether there was a man inside the title at all." He lifted her hands to his chest, over his heart. "That is why I will never stop, not because you are beautiful, though you are, and not because you are kind, though you are the kindest soul I have met, but because you are the one person alive who found the man before the title and chose him anyway. You did not even know I was a duke when you first spoke to me, as though I were an ordinary, tiresome man. Do you understand what that is worth to me? You gave me back to myself. I could no more stop wanting you than a man dying of thirst could stop wanting water. Trust that if you cannot yet trust your own worth. Trust that I am too selfish to ever let you go." She turned her face against his shoulder, and he felt her shake once, and then be still, and when she lifted her head the trouble had gone out of it. "We are a fine pair," she said, with a watery laugh. "The girl worth nothing and the man worth everything, and neither of us able to believe we are simply worth loving. We shall teach each other," he said, slowly. Over about 50 years. I have cleared my calendar." She laughed properly then, and Lady Carmody, watching unseen from the lit window of the house, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief and decided the dinners were working splendidly. They were married 6 weeks later, in the great grey church of St. Aldwyn's, and it was not a quiet wedding. Julian had considered a quiet one. Eleanor had asked for it, at first, out of the old instinct to take up as little room as possible, but he had refused her that, gently, and made her understand why. "They spent 2 years teaching you to be small," he said. "I will not marry you in a whisper. I will marry you in the largest church in London, with every family who ever crossed you off their lists, sitting in the pews, so that the whole world sees the plain girl they discarded become the Duchess of Ashworth in the full light of day. Not to shame them, Eleanor, for you, so that you never again doubt for one moment of your life that you were chosen, chosen loudly, chosen proudly, chosen in front of everyone." So the church was full. The Fenchurch Harris was there, and the Harrow girls and every matchmaker who had struck Eleanor Vale from her book, and the dowager with the cane, in the very front pew, at Julian's own invitation, beaming, and half the peerage of England besides, come to see the marriage the papers had not stopped writing about for a month. And when the doors opened and Eleanor came up the aisle, there was a sound in the church, a soft collective intake of breath, because the woman in the doorway was not the woman they had come to pity. She wore ivory silk, and she wore it as though she had been born to it. Her dark hair was dressed with a few white roses. There was no ink on her hands. Julian had watched her scrub the last of it away that morning, laughing, and had kissed the place where it had been. But it was not the gown or the roses that stopped the church. It was her face. The tiredness was gone from it. The wariness was gone. She came up the aisle with her chin high, and her gray eyes shining and steady, and she looked at no one but the man waiting for her at the altar, and every person in that church understood, all at once, that they had been wrong. She had never been plain. She had only been unloved, and grief and cruelty had grayed her over, the way dust grays a window, and now the dust was gone, and the light was coming through, and she was, quite simply, radiant. The loveliest bride any of them had seen in a decade, and they had all, every one of them, walked past her at a ball and called her nobody. Julian took her hands at the altar. They were bare and clean and trembling very slightly, and he held them still. "You are the most beautiful woman in England," he said, under the sound of the organ, for her alone. "You are biased," she whispered, smiling. "Ruinously," he agreed. "And also correct. Look at them, Eleanor. Do you see their faces? Every one of them who ever made you feel small is sitting in this church watching me marry you, and not one of them can say a word, because it is plainly, obviously true. You are worth more than all of them together, and now the whole world knows it. You never have to be small again." She looked. She let herself look, once, along the crowded pews, at the heiress, at the matchmakers, at the whole glittering society that had discarded her. And then she looked back at him, and Julian saw her set the whole of it down at last. The 2 gray years, the ballroom, the tray, the letters on the table, all of it, and let it go. "I am not looking at them," she said. "I have spent my whole life being looked at, or worse, not being looked at, and I am finished with both. I am only going to look at you now, Julian Ashworth, for the rest of my life. You are the first person who ever crossed a room for me. I do not intend to take my eyes off you again." And so they were married, the Iron Duke and the woman they had called too plain to marry. And when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the Duke of Ashworth kissed his Duchess in front of the largest congregation in London, and the church erupted, and somewhere in the front pew, an old woman with a cane was weeping and laughing at once. They did not stay in London. Julian took her north that same week, to Ashworth Hall, to the 4,000 acres and the warm great house that had been empty of laughter for 4 long years, and Eleanor filled it, not with grand things, with small ones, the kind she had been practicing her whole life. She learned every servant's name in a fortnight, and asked after their children. She reopened the still room and the music room. She helped the old and the overlooked on the estate, as naturally as breathing, because she had been the old and the overlooked, and she never forgot it, not for one day of the long, happy life that followed. The tenants adored her within a season. The county, which had been prepared to sneer at the Duke's low-born bride, came instead to love her, because it is very difficult to sneer for long at a woman who remembers your mother's cough and sends broth without being asked. As for the family on Wimpole Street, the world did, in the end, sort them out, as the world usually does. Silas Vale's small ambitions came to nothing. The ducal connection he had hoped to trade upon never materialized, for the Duchess did not receive her stepmother, and society took its cue. Prudence married a curate and grew, one hoped, a little kinder with time. Augusta did not marry at all for many seasons. The story of the letters got about. Such stories always do. And the Tun, which forgives a great deal, does not much forgive a young woman who tries to ruin an orphan with a dead soldier's love letters. She had reached for the last cruel thing, and it had cost her everything, and Eleanor, when she heard of it years later, felt no triumph at all, only a distant, tired sorrow for a girl who had never learned that kindness was the stronger weapon. That, Julian thought, watching his wife set down the letter and gaze quietly into the fire, was the whole difference between them, and always had been. The cruel are humbled in the end by their own cruelty. The kind are lifted in the end by their own kindness. It only takes the world an unconscionably long time to notice which is which. And, sometimes, one man willing to cross a ballroom and say a nobody's name out loud, so that everyone is forced to look. He crossed the room to her now. He was always crossing rooms to her. It had become the truest habit of his life, and he took her ink-free hand and lifted it to his lips. "What are you thinking of, Your Grace?" he asked. Eleanor smiled up at him, the Duchess of Ashworth, chosen and cherished and entirely done with being small. "That you were very nearly too proud to come to a ball," she said, "and that I was very nearly too tired to be helped, and that the whole of my happiness turned on an old woman dropping her cane." She drew his hand against her cheek. "I am thinking that I am glad you were watching, Julian, when no one else was. I am thinking I shall be glad of it every day for the rest of my life." "Every day," he agreed, "for the rest of your life." And he meant it, and it was so.